Hello and welcome back to Wine with Andy, and to the first of the tastings in this series of nature versus nurture. And the focus of today's tasting is going to be nurture. So we're looking at one aspect of something that you can do in the grape growing process in the vineyard that will make a difference to the flavour of the final wine. So hopefully you've been able to find a couple of wines to taste along with me. And I trailed the details of those wines that you'd need in the intro video last time. So I've got my couple of bottles here. I've got one Sauvignon Blanc from France, from the Loire Valley. This one's actually from the Touraine region of the Loire Valley. And I was meant to be looking at the back label when I was buying this to check the alcohol level. I was looking for something that was 12.5% or above. This one's actually 13. Then I've got my bottle of Chilean Sauvignon Blanc. That one needed to be 12.5% or below. This one is actually 12.5% on the nose. So there's my wines ready to go. And now I actually mentioned in one of the episodes in my Intro to Wine series about how supermarket own label wines can often be really good value. And interestingly enough, I've got two different supermarket own label wines here today to taste. Actually from different supermarkets. The French one is from the Sainsbury's Taste the Difference range, and the Chilean one there is from Co-op. So the supermarkets can give winemakers the sort of stability of knowing that they're going to have repeat orders year after year, and also they can buy in large quantities, which means that they can actually get a better price, but still be fair on the winemakers to a certain extent. So that sort of better price can then be passed on to the consumer. So the wines that you can buy from own label in the own label ranges are often very good value, like I said. But enough about that, let's get on to tasting, because that's where we're actually going to see the difference in these wines. So I have here my two wine glasses that are identical, so that the only thing that's going to be different about them is the wine inside. So that's important for tasting, of course. And if you want to know more about glasses, I've got a little separate wine tips video on glasses and how to choose a glass for wine tasting and wine drinking as well. So, first things first, Sauvignon Blanc from France. I'm going to put that in my left-hand glass there. And I'm going to put the Chilean one in the right-hand glass. There we go, my right, your left. Okay. First thing first. First things first. Let us have a look at the colour. So pick up the glasses, tilt them against a light coloured background. Very similar colour here. Not surprising, same grape, isn't it? So that is one of the major determinants of colour. So we wouldn't expect too much difference. The French one is actually maybe a little bit yellower, and the Chilean one maybe a little bit greener in tinge, so you might call this a gold and this a straw, but they're very, very similar. You can just about see that difference. But other than that, there's not a lot in it. Both sort of same intensity of colour as well. Next step, let's get into the nose. Let's have a sniff. Okay, so my French one here, I've got... What have I got? Let's think about this. I've got green fruit. What kind of green fruit is it? Well, there's apple. There's kind of a bit of maybe slightly gooseberry kind of flavours. These, in terms of the ripeness, these flavours are sort of bordering on the overripe. So that, I mean, the gooseberry element of it is definitely slightly stewed gooseberry. The apple is sort of very ripe red apple, I'd say, actually. But that sort of thing, quite nice, quite clean, quite fresh, sort of smelling there. Then the Chilean one here. Okay, very different. Now, I've got some of the same kind of flavour. And actually, these are going to be very similar wines to sniff, especially on the first sniff. And especially now, if you have cold wines. These wines are at room temperature, which is good for tasting because you get all of the flavours evaporating more at that sort of slightly hotter temperature. If your wines aren't giving you very much because they're cold, you can let them warm up, you can cradle them like this and warm them for a bit, and maybe they'll provide you with a little bit more stuff going on after you warm them up a little bit. But back to the Chilean one and spotting the difference. So to spot the difference between the two, it's good to sort of pick them both up and go back and forth with your nose. So I'm going to do that. Okay, yeah, so I can actually see that core of fruit that's the same, that slightly stewed gooseberry note. And maybe you can spot something similar where you've got that kind of core of fruity flavours. So you can imagine, I think I can imagine the fruit from that one as a sort of component of this Chilean wine. So I can see that gooseberry fruit in there. But there's something else as well. There's something very green and slightly sort of, slightly astringent that I immediately am going to call a green pepper kind of, green bell pepper kind of smell. So that's very, very obvious in this one to me. And hopefully you're getting something similar. If you're not getting it just yet, don't worry, because of course we're only on the first step of sniffing. So let's move on to that second sniffing, the second step. Oh dear, I'm stumbling over my words a bit today. I haven't even had anything to drink yet. But there we go. Okay, so we'll give this one a swirl. This is the French one. Swirl and sniff. So I've got more of that nice ripe fruit, red apple fruit, gooseberry fruit. There's a little bit of something a bit sort of metallic in there as well. Maybe like the smell of water on something metal, steel. Doesn't really matter. You can make up words. It's fine. I'm making up words. I don't know if you can tell. But yeah, nice ripe fruit. Nice sort of metallic, maybe minerally edge. Mineral and minerality is a word that you often see coming up in wine, and I have a suspicion that a lot of people who say it don't really know what they mean by it. But there we go. Doesn't really matter. Onto the Chilean one, let's give that one a swirl. Of course, it's easier on the table to swirl it a bit more vigorously. You can do it in the air as well if you practice, but you are, of course, always in danger in throwing it over you. So I've got a lot more of that green note. Something a bit sort of, something else green in there as well, a bit like nettles. If you sort of tread on nettles, that kind of smell. But yeah, lots of that green pepper, definitely quite prominent there. Let's give these a taste. Let's put them in our mouths and have a sip. So starting with the French one again. So, lots of air sucking through, lots of silly faces. I hope you're making some good silly faces there. No sugar really on this, it's a dry wine. I've got quite a decent level of acidity. I can feel that tingle on the tongue. Quite smooth on the finish. And in terms of the fruit and the flavours, I'm getting more of that nice ripe apple fruit and that sort of gooseberry kind of flavour as well. Onto the Chilean wine. And actually, that green bell pepper smell really comes out as I suck the air through. It sort of catches in the back of my, sort of top of the back of my mouth, my throat. I can feel that sort of, that flavour. Let's give that another go. It's quite tasty. Nice sort of very crisp apple fruit underneath though, on the finish particularly. Okay, whilst you continue to sip away, I'm going to have a little bit of a dive into why that difference in flavour might exist. And our first step is to turn to our old friend, the climate data chart. So this is a chart of the average temperature in both of the wine growing regions, so in Turin and in the Aconcagua Valley of Chile, which is where my Chilean wine is from. And you can see that actually the temperature lines sit quite a lot on top of each other. So there's not too much difference between them. There's certainly not really any difference in the top of them, in the peak temperature that they get to. And in terms of the wine growing season, the length of the growing season, if you look at that 10-degree line, there is a little bit extra on the Chilean one, but not too much. It's not too much longer. So the climate in terms of temperature is not hugely different. The Chilean one is a little bit warmer, but not too much. So, where's that difference coming from? Well, the clue is actually in this next chart. This is a chart of sunshine, of the amount of sunshine, basically the power in the sunlight, that's coming to Earth and can be absorbed by something like a vine. And you can see that the Chilean wine growing region is hugely more sunny. There's a lot more sunshine going on there. And partly that's because of where it is in the world, and partly it's because of the climate generally. But where it is in the world, and actually the fact that it's quite high up, Chile's quite a mountainous place, and the wine growing regions are actually quite high up. So there's sort of less atmosphere to get in the way of the sunshine. That's part of the reason there's more of it. And also the latitude, how far it is from the equator, that's part of the reason for the sunshine. And for the amount specifically of UV light. I've mentioned UV light and its importance for grape growing before. But this gets more sunshine. So that is going to help the vine ripen the grapes more quickly. And that is the source of this difference, really. So what's going on is that the winemakers in Chile are basically very heavily influenced by winemakers in France. So when they went to Chile first and planted vines and started making wine there, they tried to make wine in a very French style. And one of the things about French wine is you pick the grapes according to the sort of level of sugar in the grapes. So that you know it's ripe when it's got lots of sugar in it. But because of all that extra sunshine, the grapes in Chile got to that sugar level quite quickly. And actually there's sort of two types of ripeness going on in grapes. There's the amount of sugar that's there in the grape, and then there's the sort of physiological ripeness of it. That's things like the colour change in red grapes, which start off looking green and end up looking sort of a dark purpley black. That changes colour as they sort of get physiologically ripe. And the seeds become ready to go off and produce new grapes should they actually be planted or be eaten by an animal and pooed out at the other end. But that sort of physiological ripeness also changes the flavours of the grapes. And this greenness, this bell pepper character that we're getting in the Chilean wine is down to a specific class of chemicals called methoxypyrazines, which are present in larger concentrations in less physiologically ripe grapes, specifically of the Sauvignon Blanc, Cabernet Sauvignon family of grapes. So that's the reason that you're getting those kind of green bell pepper characteristics. It's because the winemaker has chosen to pick the grapes before they're totally physiologically ripe, but when they're sort of ripe according to the sugar level. So that the sugar level produces the right level of alcohol, this 12.5% in the final wine, but you don't get lots of tropical flavours like you might in Sauvignon Blanc from other hot places. And that, of course, is a choice that you make in the vineyard. That's something that you can change by just leaving it on the vine and making a higher alcohol wine, but getting those more ripe, more tropical flavours, if you like. And this is actually something that you can spot in other Chilean wines. It's a generic thing that's sort of part of the winemaking culture in Chile. So you can often spot it in Cabernet Sauvignon wines from Chile, in Carmenere wines from Chile as well. But it's something that's changing because it is something that comes from that French tradition of winemaking and that influence on the Chilean winemaking. The Chilean wines of today are moving more away from that and more towards a model that looks at the total ripeness, including that physiological ripeness of the grape as well. So it's something that's diminishing. So it used to be something that you could pretty much rely on to pick out a Chilean wine. Oh, that smells like green bell pepper. I'm going to say that's probably Chile. But nowadays it's less uniform. There are some winemakers, a lot of winemakers in Chile, who are making wines that have higher alcohol and more physiological ripeness. And that's the reason that I asked you to look out for a wine that had 12.5% alcohol or lower, because that was a sign that those grapes had been picked whilst the sugar was at the right level, but the physiological ripeness was perhaps a little bit below where it could have been. So here we've got an interesting scenario. We've got the wine from the country that you'd think of as cooler, France, being hotter tasting than the wine that you'd think of as from the country you'd think of as being the warmer country, Chile. And it's all due to that choice in the vineyard. Now, of course, we've not done the final part of our tasting. That is, think about the wines. Now, let's go back, have another sip, and think about which one we prefer. I'm going to start with the French, and onto the Chilean. So as it is, I think I prefer the French wine here. That's because I find that straightforward fruitiness a much more easy drinking experience at the moment. So I'm drinking these at room temperature, which is a bit of a weird temperature to be drinking a Sauvignon Blanc, right? But I'm also drinking them without food. And in that situation, the Sauvignon Blanc from France is the winner for me. There's no right answer, of course. You might have a different preference. So whatever you like is what you like. That's great. And also it's useful to know that. But if I were to change the situation, if I were to chill them down, which might sort of reduce that bell pepper characteristic a little bit in comparison to the fruit in the Chilean wine. But then if I were to drink them with food, particularly with something herby, with a lot of green flavour in the food, then I might prefer that Chilean Sauvignon Blanc, because the green flavour in the food would match quite nicely with the green flavour in the wine. And that's something to think about when you're choosing wine to have with your food. What do you think you might prefer these things with in terms of food? Interesting to sort of think about that. And if you're taking notes, to write down, Chilean Sauvignon Blanc, the green character, useful to go with herby stuff because of the greenness. Anyway, that's about it for this tasting. Let's introduce the wines for next time. So this time we were looking at nature, at an aspect of the grape growing process that you can change to change the flavour of the final wine. And next time we're going to be looking at an aspect of nurture, so something you can do in the winemaking process to change the flavour of the final wine. And we're going to be looking at oak. Now, we had a look at oak in one of the episodes of my Intro to Wine series, and there we were tasting Chardonnays. This time we're going to be tasting a red wine. We're going to be tasting a Tempranillo, and that's the grape variety used to make Rioja. So for one of the wines, I'd like you to go out and find a Rioja. So here I have my Rioja, and it's pretty easy that you can look out for Rioja on the front label, but I'd also like you to look out for the word Crianza on the first label, or I guess if you were being particularly Spanish, Crianza. So that is a specific sort of subtype of Rioja that's just to make sure that we get something that really shows what we want it to show. So have a look out for that word as well. And the second wine I'd like you to get is also from Spain, and that's going to be a Tempranillo that is not oaked. So Rioja Crianza is going to be oaked, so that's our oaky wine. And the second Tempranillo from Spain is, we want something that isn't going to be oaked. So you could look out for something with Tempranillo on the front label. You're probably going to have to check the back label to make sure that it's not been oaked. Another option, if you see it, is something that says Ribera del Duero on the front label. That's another wine growing region of Spain, like Rioja, but one where Tempranillo is made in a slightly different style. But again, you'd have to check the back label just to make sure that your wine has not seen any oak. You should be able to find something suitable though pretty easily. Most supermarkets have a decent range of Spanish wine, so hopefully that won't be too much of a challenge for you. I think I'm going to have a few sips more of these, but I'm going to put the bottles in the fridge before I actually finish them off. So I'll look forward to finishing that. But in the meantime, cheers, and I'll see you next time.